Hello, hello. Let's see who's out there. We'll give this a second because I'm going to head to bed soon. But we'll give this a second. Let's see who's out there. Robert Brooks, Eve, Monique. How are you folks doing? We'll give this a moment. It's my sister Providence. How you doing there, Providence? Hope all is doing well for you. So, Winston Walker, Todd, Bob, a few people joining in. We'll try to make this short and sweet. I was just sitting there thinking about this and just wanted to talk about it for a brief second. Thank you, Bob. Good evening to you. So, the title of this video is The Insidious Genius of Lowering the Standards for and Expectations of the American Negro. It's pretty amazing what's taken place in America. And you all know, those of you who follow me know that I am a student of history. I love studying history because the further you look back, the more clear you can see the future, for the simple fact that human nature repeats itself. Human nature doesn't even change. And because human nature doesn't change, history has a tendency to repeat itself because people fail to study history and learn from it. It's kind of like watching someone walk into it's like watching a whole crew of people walk into the same minefield and keep getting blown up. It's like lemmings. Good evening from the Ham. Bruce, Mr. Johnson, how you doing, sir? And I see I got my boy Stefan Metzler out there in Switzerland. What's going on? Bruce, Donna Joyner, how you folks doing? So listen, I was just sitting there thinking about how some of my favorite people in history were the Tuskegee Airmen. And before I jump into that real quick, let me segue, but I'm gonna bring it all together, right? President George Herbert Walker Bush actually happened to go to the same high school that my lovely wife went to. As I always tell people, that my wife went to all the great schools, and she's the brains in the operation, and I just do the driving and the heavy lifting. But President George Herbert Walker Bush, as well as his son George Walker Bush, both graduated from Phillips Academy, Andover, which happens to be the #1 prep school in America. But the Bush clan has went to Phillips Academy, Andover for generations. But George Herbert Walker Bush, when he graduated from Phillips Academy, Andover, World War II was starting, and he basically enlisted in the Navy. And his father had connections. I think it was Prescott Bush was his father, and he had connections. And so George Herbert Walker Bush was able to go into naval aviation. And to this day, he still holds the record as the youngest naval aviator in history with a high school education. And he will remain as the youngest naval aviator in American Navy history because the standards have been raised tremendously for naval aviators. You have to have a college degree. You have no chance of becoming a naval aviator in 2018 and beyond without at least a bachelor's degree. But here's what's interesting. Now, back then, they did have lower standards. A lot of pilots did not have a college education. But there's this little thing called the Tuskegee Airmen and the Tuskegee Airmen experiment, which is separate from the Tuskegee Air experiment where they injected black men with syphilis. We're talking about the experiment of the Tuskegee Airmen and what they did after pressure. And there was a young man, I believe, named Yancey Washington, who was a student at Howard University, and he pressed the issue that the military had been segregated. And I want to jump back and say that the military had largely been desegregated. The civil service, federal government employees, had largely been desegregated until the progressive Democrat Woodrow Wilson took office, the 28th president of the United States, and he took office and resegregated the civil service. Miss Bishop, how you doing? Good to see you. Once again, my condolences on the passing of your wonderful husband, Frank. So anyway, yeah, Woodrow Wilson resegregated the federal service of civil servants. And he also did a lot more to push segregation within the US military. And so everybody wants to give credit to Harry S. Truman for desegregating the military, but nobody wants to talk about the fact that it was a previous Democrat, Woodrow Wilson, who segregated the military. And it was during that time of segregation when they were pushing these ridiculous ideas that, you know, they didn't want blacks to become pilots. You know, pilots were held to high esteem, were held in high esteem. And, you know, they came up with all these ridiculous ideas. For example, I've pointed this out before. Think about this, for example. They really believed that Negroes couldn't see well at night. Yes. Part of the argument against allowing Negroes, and that was the term that was used at that time, which is to me the proper term, the American Negro. My birth certificate says Negro. But they really believed, those racist Democrats, by the way, believed that Negroes couldn't see well at night. So that was another thing that they would use to eliminate Negroes from even being able to go into the U.S. Army Air Corps, which is what it was known before it became the Air Force, right? There's all these ridiculous ideas that they had. Negroes can't see at night. And I had to stop and sit there and say, like, when do you think they ran away from the plantations prior to the Emancipation Proclamation? You think they ran away in the middle of the day? No, they did it at night. And they didn't do it, you know, it's not like they were like running away from the plantation holding up a big torch, like, ooh, let me run away from master with this torch, right? Because that's stupid. Of course, black folks can see at night, just like everybody else can see at night. Because we're really not all that different. Much, not different at all. But I go back to the progressive era, right? That's one of the things about the progressive era. There was all these pseudo-scientific notions that were being pushed by progressives who were leftist, and I call them regressive. Leftist, regressive, socialist-minded Democrats were pushing these pseudoscience narratives. Negroes can't see well at night, they're not intelligent enough, so on and so forth. But here along came the Tuskegee Airmen, and after Yancey Washington filed a lawsuit to be able to serve and to be able to have access to pilot training, of course, leftist, regressive, socialist-minded Democrats still, rather than just say, well, I guess instead of recognizing what our Declaration of Independence says, which is that we hold these truths to be all self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. See, that's based off of natural law. Our Constitution did not bestow rights upon you. All the Constitution did is acknowledge the natural rights that already existed as a result of the fact that we were created. I digress. So, you know, it's just kind of funny because they're like, oh, well, you know, all right, we'll let you Negroes fly, but you're going to be in separate units. That's what they did. You know, they when they acquiesced and decided to let Negroes fly, they had to be in separate units. And so that's where the famed Tuskegee Airmen came from. Let's see, brother Doug, what's going on, Doug? Now, here's what's interesting about that is when they formed the Tuskegee Airmen, they held them to higher standards. The things that Nick, what's going on, Nick? How you doing? Friend Nick Searcy, famous actor, well known, just phenomenal actor. Good to see you, Nick. But yeah, they held the Tuskegee Airmen to standards that they did not hold white pilots to. Hence, you had George Herbert Walker Bush, 19 years old, was able to go through pilot training to become a naval aviator, which is arguably harder because you're landing on a ship that's moving, right? You know, no disrespect to normal pilots who land on the ground, but I mean, a ship that's doing this, right? And you got to land. Yeah, naval aviators, it takes a little something extra. But George Herbert Walker Bush was able to become a naval aviator as a high school graduate. But the Tuskegee Airmen were held to a higher standard. All of them had college degrees. Some of them had master's degrees. Some of them had PhDs. They were all highly educated men. And here's what happened. See, they washed those guys out for the slightest infraction. They held these Negroes, the Tuskegee Airmen, to a higher standard. And here's the fascinating thing about human nature and human behavior. We have an amazing tendency to either soar up to hit higher standards or to swoop down to go to lower standards. And so when a higher standard was held, Negroes soared up. The Tuskegee Airmen soared up. And if you don't know the history, Google it. They became one of the most decorated flying units of World War II in history. And, you know, I hear different things about what the actual record is, but my understanding is that the Tuskegee Airmen, when they were finally given the opportunity to go overseas and to fight for their country, and they saw themselves as Americans, when they were finally given a chance to go over there to fight, they never lost. They did bomber escort. They never lost a U.S. bomber to any enemy aircraft. Now, you can't do anything about flak that's coming up from the ground. I mean, that just happens. If you watch any of those World War II movies, you'll see, I mean, the flak was so heavy, it's just like, you know, it's just bouncing everywhere. But whenever enemy aircraft, whenever any Nazi aircraft came after our bombers, the Tuskegee Airmen, just awesome guys. They protected their pilots with their lives, never lost any American bomber to enemy pilots. Now, maybe that has something to do with the fact that these were what could be called superior men who were held to a higher standard. If you really to put it in perspective, the training that the Tuskegee Airmen went through was akin to Navy SEAL training for pilots. Because they were any little infraction. Remember, we were dealing with racist, leftist, regressive, socialist-minded Democrats who did not want Negroes to serve at all, let alone be given access to airplanes. But guess what? When they served with distinction and honor because the standard was higher and they soared up to hit that standard. And what's fascinating is when you think about this long term, you know, these racists, these leftist Democrats, when they realized over time that, you know what, we keep trying to push down on these Negroes. We keep trying to oppress these Negroes. We're putting resistance on them. And you know what? You know where muscles come from? Resistance. I mean, we work out, right? We work out with resistance. So our muscles get stronger. In fact, the less resistance that you face, the more your muscles atrophy. And you know, there was an insidious genius that I don't know who came up with it. I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, it was this person. But there was somebody or some group of people who realized, you know, we can't keep these Negroes down by pushing them down. So let's be counterintuitive. Let's find another way to keep them down. I got an idea. Let's get them fat and happy. Let's stop pushing them down. Let's just lower the expectations, lower the standards. And see, there's a lot of people who will get all up in their feelings. And, you know, I don't care if you get in your feelings, but they get in their feelings about me talking about the danger of affirmative action. Because what affirmative action does is it basically says Negroes, because really, let's just be honest. First of all, it has been white females who have benefited the most from affirmative action. It's been very damaging to Black people because it's basically telling that because you're Black, you can't be successful. So let's lower the standards. And it's been amazing to watch over the past 50 or so years since affirmative action has been put in place, the standards and expectations for Negroes has been lowered. And you know what's happened? Let's just be real. We've swooped down to meet those low standards. So when you look around, whether it's here in the DC area, right? Or I always, you know, my favorite whipping boy is Prince George's County, which is Prince George's County, Maryland, which is right outside a suburb of the Washington, D.C. area. It is a lot of the residents like to brag about the fact that it's the wealthiest, predominantly Black county in the country. But yet, here's the thing: in the state of Maryland, last year was the 5th ranked public school system in the country, but this year was the 6th ranked, so it dropped a little bit. And I'm pretty sure I know why it dropped, but it's the 6th ranked public school system in the country. But out of the 20, I want to say it's 25 school districts in the state of Maryland, you know who the bottom 2 school districts are? The second worst school district is Drum roll, please. Prince George's County. You know who the worst school district is? Baltimore City. I've talked about this before. I've talked about this ad nauseum, but I feel like you have to continue to point this out. The fact that, you know, what's happened is that even in the wealthiest, predominantly black county in the country, the standards for education are lowered. There's these ridiculous, I don't even want to say expectations. It's like a lack of expectation, but these ridiculous ideas that, I mean, I read something about like, somebody says like post-traumatic, post-slavery traumatic syndrome or whatever like that. And I'm just sitting there going like, are you kidding me? Negroes born and raised in Prince George's County in the new millennium, right? After the year 2000. And somebody wants you to believe that a 18-year-old born in 2000 somehow has post-traumatic stress syndrome, being born and raised in Prince George's County in 2000, in the wealthiest, predominantly black county. Somehow the effects of slavery are affecting them. How stupid is that? Let's go back once again. I mean, you have to sit there and think history. You have to study history. Like I said, the reason why people fail so hard today is because they actually fail to go back and study history so they can understand the true history of human nature and human behavior, so they can stop making the same mistakes over and over again. See, that's one of the reasons why the left doesn't want you to study history. They don't want you to study the realities of history, the facts of history, because if you did, you might sit there and say, wow, we've made that stupid mistake before. I think we should avoid that. It's like if you hit the same pothole every day. Like, how many times on your drive home would you have to hit the same pothole and have it pop your tire and bend your rim and bust your struts for your car? How many times you have to hit that same pothole before you either make it a point to completely avoid it, to swerve around it, or you take a whole nother direction home? How many times? But see, that's why you have to study history. You have to learn from that. And there's an insidious genius to lowering the standards and saying, oh, well, because of slavery, something you ain't never seen, your mama ain't never seen, your grandmama ain't never seen, your great grandma ain't never seen, you somehow are suffering this traumatic stress because of slavery. But yet you had those young men from the Tuskegee Airmen who their parents or grandparents were slaves. They had people who were slaves who were still alive. They experienced slavery, and yet they still progressed. They still excelled, despite having had been slaves themselves, or the children or at least grandchildren of slaves. They still excelled. They still went and got their educations. They still opened businesses. They did all these things despite that. But what's the left having you do? They want you to believe that you, modern Negro, can't be successful. In fact, the only chance you have is you need us good Democrats to lower the standards for you. You understand? Because, you know, you can't make it without us. You know, because of systemic racism, you can't make it. So we're going to go ahead and lower the standards for you folks. You understand? So we're going to let y'all go ahead and speak Ebonics. Don't learn the King's English. You don't need to know that. Oh, don't worry, you know, let's see, and here's what they want to talk about is like, you take math. Okay, let's say, I mean, I remember back in 91, 92, right? Shaquille O'Neal. There was a big thing with Shaquille O'Neal, and he was talking about the SAT scores, and he was saying that it was culturally biased. And I guess more specifically at that point, you know, Shaq is actually a fairly wise guy today, but he's 45, 46 years old. You know, but back in 91, he was a dumb jock. Heck, I was dumb in 1991. If you're the same age as me, you're probably dumb in 1991 too. Thank God I outgrew that stupidity. But you know, that whole idea that the SAT was culturally biased. Okay, let's say that it was. The English aspect of the English test of the SAT, part of the SAT or ACT, was culturally biased. We'll accept that. Let's accept that. But you know, ain't no bias in math. Math is math. It doesn't care if you're black, white, green, yellow, purple, You could be pink with polka dots, and 1 + 1 = 2. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, doesn't really matter. It's all the same. So why is it that despite the fact that math is math and science is science, that there are no respect? See, math and science are universal. Like God, they're no respecter of persons. So why was it that we had men who were the descendants of slaves, direct descendants, once again, parents or grandparents were slaves, but these men were better at math, and by the way, they spoke English better than the majority of the young Black folks that I see and run across here in the Metro DC area today. It is abysmal. It is appalling. It just annoys the snot out of me when I hear young men and women walking around here in the Metro DC area, the nation's capital, one of the and look, if you've ever visited, you know, this is the Metro DC area, there's a huge concentration of wealth. It's one of the wealthiest areas in the country. But yet, and the schools spend more per capita per student than most other schools in the country. But yet and still, speaking specifically about young men and women, young Black men and women, so many of them speak like runaway slaves. And you know why? Because the expectations and the standards were lowered. So despite being born in the new millennium, despite having no real concept of slavery, really not even having any concept of what like people like to talk about of systemic racism, yet you're failing. You know why you're failing? Is because you're expected to fail, because a plan was put in place to help you fail. You were given a millstone and tossed into the water. I feel sorry for these young men and women. And I have utter disdain for all of the people who are lowering the standards. Because, and I'll say this in closing, and be saying in closing doesn't mean I'm going to stop talking right now, but in closing as I'm wrapping it up, right? I met a young man, very sharp young man. He's Haitian, owns his own business, owns a business actually in Pentagon City Mall. I met him earlier today. Very bright young man, articulate, yeah, and he's 24 years old. Played football, but once again, he's of Haitian descent. I think he said he was born here in America, but his parents immigrated from Haiti. But I just think it's fascinating that, and then that kind of led me, that's how my mind works, led me to kind of thinking about this with athletics, right? Is it amazing that if your child was playing sports, football, baseball, basketball, whatever sport they were playing, you as a parent would have a hissy fit. And I've seen parents at sporting events, sometimes they act a daggone fool. You'd have a hissy fit if the head coach of your child's sports team had low expectations and low standards for your child when it came to participating in athletics. If the coach was like, listen, man, just do whatever, you know, I mean, you're probably going to lose. So just go on, man. I'll just line up, just do whatever. If it feels good, do whatever, you know, because listen, you don't have much chance. You come from poor backgrounds, whatever. Can you imagine? Honestly, can you really imagine a head coach of whatever sport having that attitude towards your children? Saying, well, you know, your mama's a baby mama. Your daddy ain't around, so you're not going to be able to really be good at football. Nobody's going to say that. They're going to say, you know what? Okay, you come from a single parent background, your daddy's in jail, whatever stereotypical background you want to talk about. But you know what? Football is football. Basketball is basketball. Here are the rules. Here are the fundamentals of being good at this sport. So I expect you to run these laps. I expect you, if you're going to be on my team, my expectation is that you're going to show up to practice on time or you're going to run laps. My expectation is you're going to execute the play as I tell you to. Here's the playbook. Study it. You will execute the play or you'll sit the bench. That is what every half-decent athletic coach does. They have a high standard. And you can look around, look at your local neighborhood. What's the best high school in your neighborhood, in your area, or city? Let's say your region. What's the best high school football team? The best high school basketball team? The best baseball team? Whatever. Which high school has the best athletic team? You really think they have low standards? And if it's, let's just be real, if it's football or basketball, right, the team probably has a good number of black folks on it. And guess what? They're stellar. They're standout. They're stars. And the coach has high expectations. See, here's the thing. You have to buy into leftist, regressive, socialist ideology to think that the only thing Negroes can do is be good at basketball. If that's how you think, you've been indoctrinated. You know, and that's where, like, I went off last week. I was really just upset about Anne Hathaway, actress Anne Hathaway, and her ridiculously asinine statement that all black folks live in fear. Shut up, Anne. I'm still telling you to shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. Shh. Like I said, if the director is not saying action, you need to stop talking. Anyway, I'm not going to, because that, look, I don't normally get all agitated, but that one actually got me agitated. But anyway, I digress. Here's the thing. Standards. See, I'm actually part of a business team. And one of my mentors